I had a YouTube user who wrote me and asked me about quadratic congruence, and I will cover that in a later video. But in order to understand quadratic congruence, you first have to understand quadratic discriminants. So, let's cover quadratic discriminants in this video. Now, what is the quadratic equation? Now, for a lot of my students, they're sitting there scratching their head going, quadratic what? Well, I covered the quadratic equation in some previous videos. Look at my math video playlist and you'll find them. Oh, those! Yeah, I remember that. Okay, so, you already know that the quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You know that. You should know that by now. If you're one of my good students, you should know this. Okay, now, you say, well, what is the quadratic discriminant then? Well, you see this radical sign right here? You see everything that's underneath the radical sign? That b squared minus 4ac? That is your discriminant. You say, well, why do we have to know this? Okay, have you ever heard of a parabola before? Well, no, you never have taught us that. Well, that's true. I've never taught you what a parabola was. But I will be covering this in Euclid's Elements. So you better be watching those Euclid Elements videos because you're going to see this. Say, oh, okay. There's your parabola right there. And there's your discriminant right there. Now, I did cover the Cartesian coordinate system. Oh, yeah, I remember that too. You told us about that. Yep, I did. So, where this parabola touches that Cartesian coordinate system, well, that's going to be determined by this. So how does that all work out? Okay, here's how it works. If you solve this part of the equation and the answer becomes positive, then that parabola is going to touch that x-axis on the Cartesian coordinate system at 2 points. If you solve this and the answer becomes 0, then that parabola is going to touch the x-axis at 1 point. If you solve this here and the answer becomes negative, then that parabola will never touch the x-axis. Okay? So that parabola will either touch the x-axis at 2 points, 1 point, or none at all. And I will get into that further in a future video. Alright, so just to kind of show you how this works, here we go. We have this equation right here. 1x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Now, what's b? b is 4. 4 squared is what? 16. Now we have this 4 here, and we're going to multiply this 4 by 1, which will still give us 4. And we're going to multiply by 3, which will now give us 12. So, 16 minus 12 gives us 4. Now, what's the square root of 4? Now, I covered square roots in a previous video. So, what's the square root of 4? It's 2. Oh! But did you also know that negative 2 times negative 2 will give you a positive 4? Why? Because a negative times a negative is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So this answer is going to be 2 and negative 2. That means that this parabola is going to touch the x-axis at 2 points. Which 2 points are they? Okay, let's solve the rest of the equation. Well, what's the opposite of b? b is 4. So now you have a negative 4 over here. You have a 2 over here. Well, negative 4 minus 2, or actually, sorry, negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. Okay? Now, negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Okay? A negative divided by a positive will still be negative. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. That's the first solution to this thing. You say, well, do we know that actually works? Yes. Because negative 1 squared is 1. 1 times 1 is what? 1. Okay, so now you got a 1 in this position. Now, what's 4 times negative 1? Well, that's negative 4. Well, negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus positive 3 is 0. No, well, that'll work out pretty good. Okay. Now, what if this is negative 2? Well, negative 4, okay, there's your 4 right there. Negative 4 plus negative 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Now, does that work in here? Well, of course it does. Negative 3 squared is 9. Yeah, it is. Negative 3 squared is 9. 9 times 1, of course, is 9. So now we have a 9 here. Negative 3 times positive 4 is negative 12. All right. Negative 12 plus 9 is still negative 3. Negative 3 plus positive 3, zip. So we now know that works. Now then, what about equations in which you get a 0 for your discriminant? How does that work? Well, let's give you another one here. Okay. If we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 0, what's going to be our discriminant? Well, negative 2 squared is going to be 4. Okay? Now 4 minus 4 times 1 here and 1 here is still going to be 4. Okay? So what you're going to have is 4 minus 4, and 4 minus 4, of course, is 0. Now, if we solve the rest of this, we would see that this thing only has one answer. And you can solve that for yourself if you'd like. And if you want me to solve it later on, I'll happily do it in a future video. Okay. Now, what if this thing has a negative value? Okay. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So there you go. Now, what is 4 times 10? Well, 4 times 10 is 40. So, 9 minus 40 is, well, it's negative 31. Now, do you see a problem with negative 31? You can't square root a negative number, because what you get is an imaginary number. And if you get an imaginary number, you're screwed. Okay? So therefore, this parabola is never going to touch the x-axis. Okay. All right. Now you know what a quadratic discriminant is. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.